Now we're continuing with Kafka's The Trial, and I think should finish that this week. So we mentioned in the past about some aspects of it, the strangeness of it and the kind of unreality or illogicality of the sequence of events in it, which is what people call Kafkaesque, I guess. And then there was the legal aspects of it. And then the question of whether it's a political novel. And then we're going to get on to what I suggested last week was possibly a religious aspect to it. So the legal aspect, the legal procedure that happens is kind of ludicrously preposterous, really, and it's obvious from the attitudes of all the people involved, including the protagonist, that the legal process isn't really going to resolve anything. It's just complicated and makes no headway and doesn't really mean very much. But one has to go through that anyway, apparently, with no real expectation of ever actually achieving anything by that. And that's Kafkaesque as well. So I made the comment last week that I didn't think this novel or any of Kafka's novels are really political, although they're written in the first half of the 20th century, a very politically pungent time, I suppose, and when there was so much in the way of totalitarian dictatorship and so many passions aroused about all sorts of different political theories and so on the right and the left, but all of them achieving similar kind of endpoints in terms of the way society was structured. And a lot of novels were written about that. But to my mind, Kafka's novels don't really fall into that category. So then there's the question of whether it's religious. So that's what I was really going to look at today. So towards the end of the novel, so the protagonist has been to court, he's consulted various lawyers, he's been arrested in the first place, he's encountered his captors and tormentors and so on. But towards the end of it, he meets a priest or prison chaplain of some sort who explains a few things to him. And in one of them, this priest person talks about how each individual's crimes or sins must be paid for in excruciating detail. Every aspect of it must be understood and recognised and brought to the surface and dealt with in turn. There's no just overwhelming, overriding pardon or absolution that every minute detail of this crime must be explored. And that brings to mind another story of Kafka's called In the Penal Settlement, a very short story, but it describes a kind of an excruciating process in which a guilty person's crimes are actually written into their flesh in a horrible sort of a way, so that every detail is recorded in minute detail over and over again. It's kind of a horrifying story, but that's in a way the idea that this priest penal chaplain is putting forward. Another thing he talks about is that each individual seeking a way out of his problem or an answer or perhaps an absolution to his problem must at some stage enter a particular door and follow a pathway which may eventually lead to some forgiveness maybe or absolution. But one must be careful because so many people's life experiences and crimes and sins are very similar, and there are lots of different doors that may look like your door but may not be your door. So one can enter somebody else's door on the assumption this is my door. It might even progress a little way down the corridor. There are several different options one can take as one progresses, and there may be options there that seem to be one's correct option, and one may progress to 2 or 3 of those and then eventually come to one which is quite different and has nothing to do with my case. And so one then realises, well, I've actually gone in the wrong place to begin with, and has to go back out and start again. And there are so many different permutations of different mistakes or errors or crimes that one may have committed, that there's an unending series of them, and unless one gets into the correct one right from the beginning, the one that is my own particular life story, one is never going to get the answer. So one has to begin at the right place right from the start. So interestingly, if one has ever read this the Egyptian Book of the Dead, what that talks about is kind of rather like what this prison chaplain is describing, this complicated passageway through the underworld with lots of different choices and turnings and doors to go through. And in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the departed soul has to be guided by Osiris, the god of the underworld, to successfully negotiate that. So I don't know whether that was in Kafka's mind, but the picture is kind of rather similar. So is that what Kafka's talking about, this kind of question of guilt and redemption, and if there is such a thing? So interestingly, when Joseph K., the protagonist, is first arrested and told that he has to go to trial, he although he's not told what he's been accused of, and although he wants to know that at some stage so that he can mount a defence, he doesn't immediately protest his innocence. So it's as though he thinks, well, yes, I am guilty. Obviously, I'm a human being. I'm alive. I'm guilty of something, probably of many things. I mean, everyone is. So if one lives, then one has committed crimes and sins. That's the obvious nature of human existence. So it's as though he's accepted that, acknowledged that, and wouldn't try to pretend that's not the case. But he's still baffled by the process of how to negotiate that procedure, really, and come to, if he's ever going to come to an end point. So I'm not sure if that's what Joseph K., if that's what Kafka himself was thinking about, and if that's what he's writing about. It kind of seems to me that that's part of what his message is. So, like, everyone has done something wrong. Everyone is guilty of something. So different people, of course, have had a different approach to that and a different way of understanding that. So now Kafka was Jewish. He lived in the 20th century, or was born in the late 19th century, and lived into the early part of the 20th century, a time when there had been widespread denial of the existence of God or of anything to do with his laws, or that God had any input into the way that human behaviour should be conducted. He was born in Czechoslovakia, but he was in Central European kind of Germanic culture, which in the 19th century had been very much at the forefront of, even in its theological understandings, at the forefront of that denial of any real living God. So that's kind of the culture and the times that Kafka was living in. So now, like a Jew, an observant Jew, historically becoming aware of his guilt and of his sins and his crimes, would in the past have gone to the temple, offered up some sacrifices of different animals, and had his sin forgiven and washed away. Until he'd sinned again, then he would have had to repeat the process. So that was how the observant Jew dealt with that problem. In time, many Jews, well, there was no temple after it. There'd been no temple for 2,000 years anyway, but many Jews were no longer observant, especially in the 20th century. Intellectual, probably atheist, rationalist, Darwinian Jews. How did they approach that problem? If they were conscious of some failing in themselves, of some guilt, of some error in their ways, how would they have been set free from the guilt of that? Was there a way? Did they ever conceive that there was any way? So we've talked about observant Jews, non-observant Jews, people who are atheists, completely atheists, and as we said, we're talking about late 19th, early middle of 20th century. That includes a very large number of people. Were they still conscious of some sense of guilt and of failing and of sin even? And if so, what did they do about it? Did they see any need for expiation or of any way out of that? The Christian point of view obviously is somewhat different from that. But so Christians and Jews, of course, have the Ten Commandments available to them as a guide to what one should or shouldn't do. And probably most people really do have that same understanding, even if they've never actually seen the Ten Commandments in print or heard them. But I think most people understand that those are the basic do's and don'ts. So the Christian point of perspective obviously is that we do fail in those areas, and we keep doing it, but that's what Jesus Christ was all about. He came to take the guilt for all of that from us in himself, so that we are then set free from all that. So that's the thing that I think Kafka didn't know and didn't have access to, unfortunately. So interestingly, at the end of the novel, perhaps the most sensational part of the novel, and most Kafka stories are not sensational, but at the end of the book, Joseph K. himself is actually executed in a kind of almost a ritual, sacrificial kind of death, which is very dramatic. And that's how the book finishes. Although it probably doesn't really finish. I mean, none of Kafka's novels were really actually completed. Most of them were not published in his lifetime, so no one really knew much about them or read them while he was alive. But most of them were never actually even finished, which is probably fitting in a way. How would you finish it? I mean, all the questions he puts forward in all these novels are not answered, and no one really provides the answer. So it's kind of makes sense that the books don't actually come to an end point, really.